Good morning and welcome everyone to the CAM Filmmaker Summit Work From Home Edition. Thank you so much for joining us. First off, I'm Sapna. I'm the Talent Development and Special Projects Manager here at CAM. And first of all, we need to thank our funder. Thank you so much to the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation for supporting CAM and especially for supporting the Filmmaker Summit. I'd also like to thank our co-presenters. Thank you so much for getting the word out to ADOC, Frameline, and to Bayvac. We created the Filmmaker Summit as a space where we can convene our community of makers, our partners, our fellows. It's a space where we hope we can come together to talk about our work, the work of making films, of collaboration, and also of sustaining our own livelihoods. Yesterday, if you joined us, we had a couple of great sessions moderated by previous fellows, Vicky Du and Emily Hong. This morning, we're really excited to have mentor PJ Raval, who may need no introduction in this community. He's a director of award-winning films like Kalhar Ganda. He is also a cinematographer, very coveted in the community. And today he's going to be moderating this panel on documentary story development and process. Without further ado, PJ.
Thank you, Sapna. First off, I want to just thank all of you out there for joining us. I think we're going to have a really great conversation that I've been really looking forward to for the last couple of weeks. So thank you to Cam for putting together such a great panel. You know, considering our moment in time, I think now is the best time to actually be talking about story development, because I think there are a lot of filmmakers and media makers out there who are thinking about ways to capture this current moment. And I think many people are inspired right now to create work about experiencing maybe what they're witnessing or perhaps even outraged over. So I think right now is the best time to have this conversation. So this panel is going to be about story development, and thinking about it kind of from moving from idea to actual execution or production. And our panelists today are some of the most exciting filmmakers and voices in our AAPI community. So I'm really excited about this. So without further ado, our first panelist is Marjan Safinia, whose film And She Could Be Next screened last night during CAMFest. So I hope a lot of you caught it. And if not, I know it's going to be broadcast premiere on POV and PBS as a two-part series. So welcome, Maj.
Thanks, BJ. Yes, And She Could Be Next is a two-part series. We're actually really thrilled to be POV's first ever multi-part broadcast documentary. So I'm thrilled about that with my partner, Grace Lee, and my producing partner, Jyoti Sarita. And She Could Be Next is about a 3.5-hour story told over 2 nights about a defiant movement of women of color who are transforming American politics. We look at candidates and organizers who are basically fighting for an inclusive and reflective democracy, which recognizes the power of the new American majority, all of those of us who are not identified as white. So we're really, really thrilled. We're going to be broadcast on POV at the end of June. You know, we made a decision to center gender and race in an epic American political tale, which hasn't really been sort of done at this scale before. And we think it's the antidote for our current times. It is a shot in the arm of hope and promise of a better America to come. So we have a little trailer we can play, and maybe that's a good time to do that now.
In the history of this country, any guesses out of 11,000 people that have served in the United States Congress, how many women of color have served?
There is this assumption that Black people don't vote, that Latinos are not American citizens, that Asian Americans are Republicans, and that young people are wholly unreliable.
I want you to understand that who I am is a product of a movement.
There are not enough people on the inside that look like me.
People aspiring to be leaders in this country, they need to go through women of color because we're making our voices known.
When I say I'm a social justice seeker, I'm a mama for justice, or all these things, that's where I'm saying I'm American. I don't need to say it. I act like an American.
Candidates do not normally talk to people in the Asian American community because, historically speaking, we are the community that turns out to vote at the lowest rates. So we want to change that here today.
Cái cô kia cô không có ở nhà, bác gái có muốn đi vào hôn với con dẫn đi bây giờ luôn.
We're no longer asking for permission to do what we need to do. We're going to do it, and we're going to lead from the top, and people need to see it.
The sort of traditional notions of what's possible in American politics are being challenged every day.
Elections are important, but our lives are on the line. Elections
Sisters and brothers, it's about building power in our community to win what is right.
Except the communities that need to be brought in reflect the new American majority. They're young, they're brown, they might speak another language.
And there's a lot of us.
I'm excited about the fact that women of color are now coming into our own, that we're standing up and taking our rightful place in the pantheon of leadership, that we're changing what the face of leadership looks like.
It is a new day, there's a new coalition, and ultimately we're going to push this country forward because there's more of us than those that seek to do us harm.
Thanks for sharing that. I caught it last night, and absolutely such an important film, and obviously very timely. So thank you for that. Moving on to our next panelist, we have Chen, who is the director of First Vote that received a Cannes Documentary Fund Award and I believe screens tonight. Welcome, Yi. If you could tell us a little bit about your project.
Hi, yes, PJ, thanks for having me. So First Vote is showing tonight as part of ChemFest. I'm very excited about that. So it's an hour-long verite style documentary that follows 4 Chinese American voters in 2 battleground states, North Carolina and Ohio. So the 2 characters are Republicans and 2 are Democrats. So the film followed their political civic engagement centering around the 2018 midterm elections. I think we have a short clip featuring 2 of the 4 characters.
There used to be Suguj campaign signs all over the medians here on 15501, driving around all over the place in the triangle. So then I looked it up. Sure enough, I mean, I saw pictures of her wearing a qipao with an AR-15 in her right hand and a semi-automatic pistol in her left hand. And when I think about how I want more Asian Americans to participate, or more Chinese Americans to participate in American political life, this is not what I had in mind. Because she's a fucking Tea Partier, because she represents everything that I loathe in American politics.
外面很冷啊，进来吧。这个还是挺沉的。这个是我的。两个都是你的。对呀，当然是我的啊！大家为什么会有这个疑问呢？
因为我不知道是道具还是说是真的。
哎呀，谁会拿道具呢？这个是比较奇怪的。我不会去拿道具，也不会去拿别人的枪，这是我的枪。好了，看好了。
Thanks for joining us, E. Our next panelist is Sarita Khurana, who was the 2018 Tribeca Best New Director for the film A Suitable Girl, and is also currently a 2020 CAM Doc Fellow. Welcome, Sarita.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here, and really nice to have this space during this time. So I'm going to talk about 2 projects today, and the first one is something I'm working on as a CAM Fellow. It's about South Asian seniors and how they're aging in this country. And that's in a very early stage in research and development. And then the film PJ referenced, A Suitable Girl, done with my collaborator Smriti Mundra. We're going to see a clip of that, and it basically has been on the festival circuit. It's on Amazon now. And that follows three characters, three young women in India who are going through the matrimonial process. So you'll see a clip of that, and I'll also talk about that a little later. Thanks.
Things happen like this only in girls' life, so I can't say it is fair or it is unfair. But girl have to take it like this only.
It's great to see the trailer. It makes me want to watch the film all over again. Sarita, why don't you tell us about the project that you're currently working on?
So the project I'm currently working on is really looking at our elderly aunties, uncles, parents, our South Asian elders, and a look at really how they're aging in this country, how a lot of family and cultural dynamics are shifting. And I am working with several different groups of seniors right now. And actually, I just finished a piece for ADOC for their COVID-19 series. That was a small look at one South Asian senior center in Queens, which is really hit with COVID right now. And it's a 2-minute micro doc, but it was something I'd been thinking about for a long time in terms of this issue of aging in our community. And so I made this piece in the moment, but really it's part of a longer look at, you know, these shifting cultural and family dynamics in South Asian communities and what that looks like now. So there's a couple of different research sites I'm working with right now in Florida and New York. So that's the next feature.
Great. Can't wait to talk more about it. And last but not least, our last panelist is Ligaiya Romero, who is currently a 2020 CAM Fellow and I believe working on their first feature documentary. But welcome, Ligaiya. Why don't you tell us about what you've been up to?
Hi, everyone.
I'm Ligaiya. I use they, them, theirs pronouns. And I also wanted to acknowledge that even though we're gathering here in a virtual space, that currently I'm located on Indigenous Lenape territory, and I wanted to honor that. Like PJ said, I'm working on my first feature, my first documentary feature-length film, and it's called Not Your Model Minority, about Asian American activists in the South who are unapologetically queer, rad, brown, and working toward liberation in our lifetime. And PJ is my mentor, which I'm extremely grateful for in the CAM Fellowship. I'm in development on that project, so the work that I'm going to show today for this panel is actually from a photography book that I've been working on in the Philippines. And y'all can go ahead and, I guess, cue up that video, and I could talk a little bit while it's playing because there's no audio. Thank you. So yeah, so this is from a series that I was working on in the Philippines. And I usually say that this work is about the landscape of memory, inherited trauma, and the decolonial imagination. So I'm not sure if you can read that, but the short text at the end is the only poem that I've ever written, and I wrote it in the Philippines when I was there. And yeah, and so I'm working on that, and feels like kind of like a project that I'll continue to be working on alongside some of the films that I'm developing as well.
Great. Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you.
So let's just jump right in. I have a lot of questions for all of you, and you know, I'd love to treat this as a very organic conversation, so feel free to jump in, you know, wherever you like. But the first question I have is I was thinking it would be really great to kind of frame this conversation from an actual development perspective, right? So a lot of the times this starts with just the idea, right? When you first have an idea, and I'm curious to know when that idea first happens, where does it come from and where does it go? You know, who do you start telling about it? What do you start doing when you have this idea? And also, do you already know what form this might take place, right? Because you know, right now, documentary and nonfiction work can take the form of feature films. You know, with UMAG, it can be a series on PBS, on POV, it can be an interactive piece. So when you start thinking about this idea, do you already know the form it's going to take, and how much of that informs where you start taking this idea? Why don't we start with Madge?
Just unmute myself. So, so in the case of And She Could Be Next, the idea was born before I joined the project. Actually, Jyoti Sarita had wanted to do something about women and politics. You know, this was in 2016 when we thought we may have a woman, the first woman president. And then she had reached out to Grace, and Grace, being Grace Lee, was like, I'm really not that interested in all women. I'm interested in women of color. And so Grace had sort of added that spin to it. And then Grace reached out to bring me on because it was a really massive project and a huge heavy lift. But I mean, it took many, many iterations. I think that's in fact, I think that's probably the trick of projects that live and projects that don't, is the ability to stay open and keep like churning it over and seeing what better comes out. So in our case, I think we had an intention at the beginning for it to be a series, but it was sort of a chaptered series. So it was like the Stacey Abrams episode, the Rashida Tlaib episode. But then we realized as we started to work on it that we really wanted to see this as a movement, right? And so these stories needed to live together, and that you know, Stacey's story in some ways is reflective of Bushra, who's the youngest girl in our film. She was 19 when we started following her running for office. That even these two ends of the spectrum, the fact of their gender and their race, you know, had a lot of commonality. So it kind of morphed, and then at some point in the middle, we were going to just be a film because we couldn't get funding for a series, and then we shot it all, and then it became a series again. So, I mean, you know, I think that sometimes in our industry, sometimes some false divisions, in my opinion, are made between format, right? As though like a series is a very different thing than a film. And, you know, sometimes that's true, but I don't think it has to be. And I think that sort of the more we are able to be agnostic about some of the old you know, sort of gatekeeper kind of structures, the better we're able to tell stories, and the more we're able to engage audiences who, you know, are, as you said, get used to seeing things in so many different ways now. So nonfiction storytelling doesn't have to be, you know, I mean, the Academy short, like under 40 minutes. It's like an arbitrary decision somebody made at some point, and we don't have to remain slaves to it. So yeah, for
so
us,
regardless, going in, you knew it was going to be a multi-character
we knew
kind of chaptered experience, not one subject, for instance.
We knew for sure that we were going to have a lot of women, and how do you manage that? And then as we started to spend time with the women and their stories, we realized that they're just a piece of the story, and there was all this movement around them, right? All these organizers. So we just kept adding people in, and, you know, had dozens of people tell us, this is too many, there's no way you can pull this off, they'll never tie together, you need to do this in a chaptered way. But, you know, being bullheaded is not always a bad quality. And so we just stuck to our convictions, and, you know, in the end, you know, I think we've got something that works very strongly, but, you know, it was like an undulation as we went through the development process.
How about you, E? With First Vote, did you already know that you were going to follow many characters, or did you think you were going to follow one?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, I didn't know at the beginning, actually. So the film actually also started after the 2016 election. So I started the project in January 2017. So at the time, I noticed this this Chinese Americans for Trump movement that, you know, I saw a lot of news coverage about that. And so it was very unexpected because one is most of them were first generation immigrants of China and from China, and most of them were first time voters. And they were very passionate supporters of Trump. So that challenged my assumptions about Asian American voters. And also, I had never seen such passionate participation in the democratic process within my own community. And there was also a lot of divide within the Chinese American community. So I knew that I wanted to find characters from both sides. So that's something that I knew, and I knew that I wanted to find characters in battleground states. So yeah, so I just started out asking around people I know, and joined WeChat groups. There are lots of conservative WeChat groups. Yeah, and and I started going to their events. So they organized like picnics, fundraisers in 2017 for local Republican candidates. So I started going to these events and started doing research interviews.
For both of you, can you mention just briefly where your film takes place and where you were based at the time you were making it?
Our project takes place across the country, and we're based in LA. But we worked with an extraordinary team of field directors. So we shot in Georgia, in Detroit, in Los Angeles, in Texas, in Illinois, and we also shot in New Mexico, although that story is going to live as a short that's outside of the series.
And E, for you?
Yeah, I'm based in Washington, D.C., and the film takes place in Ohio and North Carolina.
Great. How about you, Sarita, with A Suitable Girl? If you could talk a little bit about that at first.
Yeah, so Suitable Girl takes place in India, in Mumbai and Delhi and Rajasthan and Karnataka as well. And I'm based in Brooklyn, New York, and Smriti's based in LA. And so basically we lived in India over the course of 4 years. And when we started out, we didn't really know it was going to be 4 years of filming. So we lived there for 6 months or 7 months initially, and we came home for 2 months, and we went back for 4 months, and we came back for 2 months. It was that's basically what happened. And in terms of finding the characters, initially we cast quite a broad net, and because we were also doing research, and development at the same time. And we weren't even clear that we were going to follow 3 particular women. We actually started interviewing a lot of matchmakers, and they came from different communities, different parts of India. And we realized the matchmaker is interesting and they have an interesting business, but really the story is going to lie with the young women, the young people who are considering getting married or trying to get married. And we just started talking to a lot of young people, men and women, just to understand and find out, like, what does it look like for you? Do you even want to get married? What does that involve for you? And a lot of it was meet somebody in a coffee shop, be introduced by this matchmaker to one of their clients, hang out somewhere and tell somebody about your film while we were living in Bombay. And they're like, oh, I know this cousin of mine who's doing this. So we probably interviewed, I don't know, 50, 60 young people. And a lot of it was who was also willing to be in the film, because I think a lot of it is, when you're thinking about a verite film and you're following characters, there really has to be a collaboration and a willingness from that person to want to share their story. And it was never, hey, we're going to shoot for 4 years. Are you going to do this with us? It was one step at a time. We have one conversation and that opens up into the next time we can come to your house and hang out and maybe film a little bit, to the next time where we get to meet your parents. And so it was really building that trust and finding those characters, and one step at a time.
Great. How about you, Ligaiya? Where are you in your process right now?
Ooh, I feel like I've been saying just in the beginning for the past year now, but I do feel like I'm just at the beginning. I love what Sarita said about building trust. That's something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, especially at this point in the process. I've been doing a lot of research into kind of the beginning of the Asian American activist movement. And so the PBS Asian American series that just came out was extremely helpful with that. And just reading a lot, taking time to look at the history of the topic and the work. But yeah, the idea of moving at the speed of trust, which comes from Adrienne Marie Brown, has really been on the top of my mind lately. Which can be slow, right? And I have been reaching out to a lot of trusted friends, trusted organizers who are doing movement work in different sectors in the South, and also reaching out, kind of using the project as an excuse to reach out to my movement crushes, people that I've always admired from afar and really love their work and want everyone else to love their work. And using the project as kind of, an excuse to kind of get that conversation started. I sent a shot in the dark email to Ai-jen Po recently that I was really excited about. Just people like that in all sectors and all scales. But to your earlier question, PJ, about did the form of the project, and did I know from the beginning that it was going to be a feature or whatnot? I think the story always dictates, right, the shape of the container. But I've thought and still continue to think that these stories could be anywhere from a community installation, an interactive installation, to a series of a limited series or a feature-length film. And I've been thinking a lot about how to make the most use, I guess, of the same footage. Can the same footage, I also work as an editor, and I think about all the footage that gets left on the cutting room floor. And I think about, can the footage be used in multiple forms? So can it be a feature-length film and then also an interactive installation, et cetera, et cetera? So that's on my mind right now.
That's a smart idea. You know, one thing you mentioned in your comment was this idea of your movement crushes, right? Which I love that. But it also makes me think about just your personal interests and things, right? In terms of your own, just your own interests and personal interactions. And so one of the things I wanted to ask all of you was, thinking about kind of my original question, where these ideas come from. Also just are these, and your personal kind of interest in them. I want to move into talking about casting, right? And the story development, because in a lot of ways, casting and meeting people is almost like blind dates, right? Like these are people that you think of or maybe hear of, and then you have to meet them and start figuring out, are they going to be a good, a quote unquote good character in this documentary? Will you be able to follow them? Even just thinking about your interaction. So I want to turn a little bit and start thinking about this idea of casting and how does that work, especially with many of you filming something with so many different characters, right? The potential for who's going to be in this film could be really enormous. So how do you start figuring out who's going to be in it and who you're going to commit to start following? Let's put it that way.
I mean, I think your blind date analogy is a great one, only I would amend it to say it's like a blind date where one person has been stalking the other person, like hardcore online first, right? So there's always that slightly weirdness where this person who, like Ligaiya said, you've been crushing on and like researching and looking at all their pictures and, and they don't know you from Adam. And suddenly, so it's like a very loaded blind date. Maybe it's a bit more like a suitable girl. There's a lot of kind of strings attached to the first meeting. So I mean, I think it's I think with documentary we sort of gloss over this idea of casting, but I think it's very, very important. I think I mentioned the other day, I call it crasting because it's so crass to talk about casting with real people. But it's so important because if we want that story to do its job, right, to translate and connect, we have to have people who not just sort of fit whatever the boxes are. I'm looking for an old person, a young person, a person in the South, a person of color, whatever, but they have to be willing, right? We'd be willing to go on this slightly crazy journey with you, and to be willing to let down their guard. In our case, we had shades of that being easier and less easy because we were following politicians, people who were, wanting to run for office. And we live in this crazy climate where everyone, especially their teens, right, are like so obsessed. I mean, I think I love the documentary Wiener, but I mean, it's made it so much harder for anyone who's doing anything political because everyone is like terrified of being wienered, and so, navigating that space with kind of quite public figures I mean, I've worked with some high profile folks, but in much shorter form, but in a longer way like this, it was kind of a different kettle of fish. So I think, sometimes you fall in love with someone, but they just aren't going to work that well on camera, and they're extraordinary people and have a great story, but you kind of have to be willing to let go of the ones that aren't, that is going to be too hard, because we know that the process is really long and intimate, and it's just a weird thing, because then after the blind date, and then you date for a while, and then you get out of their lives, right? You go for like a period of time, and then suddenly you're like, okay, here's this thing and everybody in the world is going to see it, and are you ready? And they haven't really like thought about it that much since you left them a year and a half ago, so it is a very weird thing that we do, and I think our best tool is just our ability to connect with humans and be trustworthy, right? Like, can they trust you? And then the rest is a leap of faith on their part.
So crasting. Does anyone else feel like what they're doing is crasting? I certainly feel that way at times. Anyone else? E, could you talk a little bit about how you found your characters?
Yeah,
I'm curious. First of all, I'm just curious how all of you refer to the people that you're following. Do you say subjects, characters, protagonists? I know that there's protagonists, right? There's different ways to refer to it. So E, how did you find your protagonist?
Yeah, I love what Marge said about casting and willingness. So yeah, I mean, I interviewed a lot of people, particularly on the conservative side. and most of them were not willing to be in the documentary. But actually there's several of them told me that we listened to this podcast made by this guy in Ohio, you should check him out. So he was kind of like a well-known person in the community, right? So I reached out to him, and he was going to a Republican state dinner in Ohio with Pence. And so he was like, yeah, sure, come along. You can film me at this dinner thing. So that's how I found, Lens. I think, and I think that before, actually it took 6 months, the casting process. It took 6 months for me to really find characters that are willing to be part of a documentary. And I think, so for me, what I was looking for, like I mentioned, I was looking for characters from both sides, and I was looking for characters in battleground states. And I think the other thing that was important, because it's a verite film, I was also looking for characters who were very actively doing things, but also in different ways. So for example, Lance, he has a podcast. He has like a Mandarin language, Rush Limbaugh style podcast. So, and then he was supporting this candidate in Ohio, Jim Renacci. And there was a little uncertainty whether Jim Renacci will win the Republican primary. And then if he wins or he doesn't win, so I didn't know what that story was gonna go. And with Sue Gooch, she ran for Congress in 2016, so she was already a public figure. So for her, the story was interesting because she brings another aspect of civic engagement, because she ran as a candidate. And so she was deciding whether or not she will run in 2018 or 2020. And Kaiser, he actually wrote an article about the Chinese Americans for Trump movement. So I read his article and I reached out to him. And he was already a public figure, a very prominent speaker on US-China relations. And he was actually one of the founding members of this Chinese rock band, Tang Dynasty. So Kaiser was also very willing as well. So I initially started with 3 characters, and later I found Jennifer. So I think talking about willingness, I think one of the reasons I think they were willing to be in a documentary is that they were already in the spotlight in one way or another. So a lot of people I talked to who were more private weren't as willing to be in the documentary.
And I think that's something that's very hard to negotiate, right? If someone tells you no, right? But you see them as, maybe you got to convince them. So I'm wondering if any of you have had that experience of there is someone that you think would be great to be putting in your film, but they might need a little bit of convincing. So if someone tells you no, do you take that as a no, or do you try to negotiate with them or try to explain it to them, or even try to convince them why it would be a good thing to do? I'm curious if any of you have had that experience. How about Sarita, with your project, did everyone automatically say yes, or was there someone you were chasing after who you were unable to get?
No, there's definitely always people who you think are really great and they would be great for your film, but no, it doesn't always work out. And you can even show them, hey, I did this work before, I'm legit, but you have to kind of just respect that and sort of let go. In Suitable Girl, Ritu, who's the daughter of the matchmaker, did not want to be in our film. I mean, she's in the film, but it took a long time for her to kind of just go with it. And you could tell she's kind of the most resistant and kind of holds back. And, it was great. She eventually came around, but it wasn't always like that. And not for that particular film, but I've had other projects where the film has died on, the idea has died on the fact that, like, okay, that if that person's not in it, because it's the characters and their lives that are really going to carry the topic, you know, at least for the kind of work I make. It's not you know, it's not just talking heads and like B-roll. It's what are these people doing in their lives? What are their behaviors? What are their, and I've had films definitely die where I've like, that's a great idea, but I'm not finding the right person for this, or this person's not really willing to be in it. So that's a big decision, and you kind of have to let things go at certain points.
Letting things go. Just a quick note to our audience. I see that there's some questions coming in. We're going to have a little bit of a discussion for just another couple minutes, but I'll open it up for questions for sure in about 10 or 15 minutes. How about you, Ligaiya, where you are right now in terms of thinking about who will be in this film, right? You mentioned having your movement crushes. So how do you figure out which crush gets the spotlight?
Oh, it's hard. I feel like I could make, you know, a film with 100,000 people in there. But I did want to add to your question about approaching people who are maybe reluctant to be filmed and things like that. And I think a thought I had was that I've just been thinking a lot about consent in documentary practices lately, and how I come from a journalism background, and one of the things that I was always uncomfortable with was kind of the idea that like, oh, well, you know, if it was legal, then it was right? Like, oh, if they were in a public space, then and it was legal for you to photograph them, then that's it. Then you had permission to do so. And I've been thinking a lot about what would it mean for us to incorporate consent practices that were more in line with our sexual and romantic practices. So consent that's affirmative, enthusiastic, continuous. So even if you were given a yes, maybe at the start of the project and the person changed their mind, that you would respect that. And so, yeah, I've been thinking about, I've never been in the situation where someone, where I really wanted someone to be a part of the project and they didn't want to be, and I felt like I needed to, you know, coerce them into saying yes or anything like that. But I have been thinking too about how maybe sometimes it's the people who are more comfortable in the spotlight that maybe I tend to be less drawn to, you know what I mean? I think it's like a lot of it, it's like the untold stories, or people who are doing the work without a lot of recognition or outside of the spotlight that I'm really interested in working with and magnifying their stories if they're comfortable with that. So yeah, it feels like a bit of a paradox, right? In that way. But yeah, back to your question about, you know, how I'm kind of like deciding who to work with for this film. It's really unclear for me. That's something I think I've reached a lot of the outer limits of my skill set as a new filmmaker, as an emerging filmmaker, and that's something that I'm still feeling through. But I will say that especially with, since this film, I am aiming to center different movements that are also interconnected. I am looking at different types of work that I follow and I believe in. So specifically, like, you know, anti-racist work, queer liberation work, labor movement work, domestic workers' rights, especially, you know, as a Filipinx person, there's so many family ties that I have to domestic workers' rights, and really realizing that each one of those movements and the people who work in those movements are really intertwined. And so is there a way that I can make a film where I'm following, let's say, like 3 or 4 protagonists that work in seemingly different pillars, and then it kind of all comes together at some point?
You know, one of the things, Ligaiya, that you're talking about now that we've been touching upon is this idea of trust, right? Like getting your protagonist to trust you, right? Trust to tell their story, trust to film them. But I also want to turn it on all of you in terms of thinking about trusting yourselves, right? And I think we all know as filmmakers, making work is a very vulnerable place, and you have a lot of people telling you what kind of film you need to make and how you need to do it and what's the best way to do it, when you're the one who's actually in the trenches making it, right? So I'm wondering, during this process, after you have this idea, after you start, even filming or developing it further, how do you maintain trusting yourself where you know where this film is going? As as a director, as a filmmaker, how do you take someone's comment of, well, you should do this, and be able to put that into your world, or move past it, or ignore it, or take it into consideration? I'm just curious in terms of how do you maintain trust of yourself to make this project?
I think this is the eternal creative battle, right? Like, this is the life we've chosen, and it's riddled with self-doubt all the time. And I think that maybe just time and experience lets you know that even if you don't know that you can trust yourself, there is a process, and you can trust the process, and understanding that doubting all the way along is a part of that process. So, I feel like it's the sort of bifurcated experience of some days you wake up and you're like super clear, and you're super adamant, and you're like, everything's in flow. And then you just get one person who says something to you, and you're like, oh my God, have I got this all wrong? Is this gonna work? So, and that's just the life of being creative, right? So, I think, like, it's come for me, it's my instincts. Like, I know I have good instincts. I know I can trust my instincts. And even if I can't make every decision exactly perfectly, or I double back on something, I know that at the heart of that, my instincts are, have proven over a lot, decades. I'm coming up on 50. So I'm like, you can trust yourself now, right? And so I think that's part of it. And then with the feedback thing, listen, if you ask a person for an opinion, they are going to offer you an opinion. So that is just a universal truth. And so the more people you ask, the more opinions you're going to get. And so I think you've just got to really learn, like, when do I want that cacophony of input? And also probably much more importantly, what can I take and what can I leave? I find actually sometimes the naysayers, I'm often thinking about, what are the naysayers going to say about this? Because I find that their input is often very helpful, not to listen to, but to work against, or to try to make sure that as you're doing the work, you know what the naysayers are going to be thinking, and you sort of address it in the work, before, you give people the opportunity. I have to say, right now we're about to go out into the world. It's we live in a very political climate. I have some serious concerns about being breitbarted, by this work that we're putting out there, and how does it just get completely misread? So, I don't know. I sometimes feel like if I wanted a job where I didn't have all sorts of uncertainty, there would have been better career choices. This career choice is completely uncertain at every level, all the way until the end, So I guess you've got to have that in your DNA, that works for you on some level. Otherwise, that's why we have so many mental health issues in our industry, because really it is truly challenging, and holding your line, you've got to tough it out.
Anyone else want to add to that?
Totally everything Marjan just said. Yes, it's filled with lots and lots of doubt. And, one other element of that is the financial aspect. As filmmakers, you often have very little money to work with, and that you want to spend it wisely if you have money. And some of that doubt definitely comes from this feeling of scarcity, right? Like, it's how can I spend a few $1,000s following that person? Is it going to work out? Like, can I, will I get more funding if I, use this little bit of money for this? But I think, so there is doubt there, but it's also, one lesson I've learned is this lesson of risk, right? Like, if we don't risk it, and we don't spend that little bit of money and expect that we might fail, like, we'll never figure it out, actually. So it kind of goes hand in hand for me, where I feel like, yeah, there's a lot of doubt, and there's limited funding, but I have to take some of those chances in order to fall and fail, and then figure out, like, I know how to do this better now. So I do have more confidence in myself. So it's not going to be perfect. and great every time, and I need to kind of learn to figure it out. And that helps with the doubt. You know, like Marjan was saying, you build that confidence, you build that trust in yourself.
How about Ligaiya and Yi? Any moments of doubt right now? Or Yi, did you have any in the process of making?
Yes, definitely. Looking back, it was not easy. I mean, I think for documentary filmmakers, it takes a lot of perseverance and persistence. So for me, one of the biggest challenges is that I have it ended up being 4 characters, but it started out with 3, and they didn't know each other in real life, and their story. So that's a challenge that how do I connect their stories together? They don't know each other. And also in terms of fundraising, there's a question of balance. Like, why do you have 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat, and also have 2 Trump supporters in the film is not an easy, it's not an easy way to raise money. And I feel like I get interviews, and I feel like people are trying to find out if I'm a Trump supporter. Why are you making this film? So yeah, I mean, definitely a lot of challenges. And I didn't know if particularly the 2 conservative characters, like, they could say at any point, I don't want to be in your documentary anymore. Like, even they signed releases, but that doesn't mean, they wouldn't say, I don't want to be in this anymore. So yeah, I mean, I just kept calling them. I just kept showing up, and I kept in touch with them. And
It's true. Making a film is a risk, right? You're taking a risk.
Yeah, and and one of the first questions when I first met them, they asked was, are you a Republican or are you a Democrat? So I think I was in a very unique position back then. I was becoming a naturalized citizen, and I had never voted before. And I came here as an immigrant, very similar path in terms of immigration path. So, I was able to get access to both sides because of my kind of unique position at the time. Yeah, I think if I'm a citizen now, and I'm going to vote for the first time this year. So I think if it was 2020, I probably wouldn't be able to get that access.
How about you, Ligaiya? Do you feel like you're taking a risk right now?
Yeah, of course, always, right? And and to your question, PJ, earlier about being swayed by other people's opinions, I think that's been both a gift and a challenge. Is that when you tell people about your project, and you kind of start kind of like soft pitching to different people in our field. People do get excited about the work, but then they always have kind of a lens or an idea that they want to add to it. And I'm a Gemini, so I feel like my attention is like, I'm always like, yeah, it should be an installation. It should be a podcast, but I also, to Sarita's point about kind of like the scarcity that's built into our field, you can be interested in doing all of those things, but the budget or the funding that you have is very locked. But yeah, I think about that a lot, about what kind of like an abundance mindset would look like in our field, and for me in this work. Risk definitely feels higher stakes when you start getting funding, and you start getting different support and different voices that I think are kind of coming in to influence the project. And I think putting yourself out more in public is always a risk, because it makes you more vulnerable to people who disagree with you or who are going to kind of challenge that work.
Right. Filmmaking has risks at all stages, including risk of failure. You might make a bad film. That's certainly possible, right?
Well, I just want to add, PJ, that, it's, we ask the people in front of our cameras to take that risk with us. right? So it's like there is a relationship that we're both in, which is, you know, founded on good intent, but a lot of faith, like at every, you know, from them to share this with you and for you to actually be able to do something with it and get it out in the world, you know? So, you know, I think it's, I think there's this idea of authenticity, like both in the picking of the subject, right? Like in my experience, the ones who are less comfortable in their own skin are the ones who work less well, you know, in a film. And so, you know, you have to be in your authentic self and allow them to be in their authentic selves and understand that this whole thing is a gamble, but if it pays off, if it hits, something really beautiful and magical can happen, not just in your personal life, but for obviously all the people who are touched and moved and seen by the work that you make, you know? So one time I started to develop a project with an economist, and this was one of the ones that went away. We couldn't get it off the ground because, you know, in the end he was reluctant, but we spent 4 days filming with him. And he was so perplexed by what we do, like, because as an economist, everything like makes sense and it has to add up and work, you know? And he just like could not wrap his head around, wait, you're here on your own dime and you were doing all this filming, but you don't know what it's for. And, you know, so as I said, it's like, it's either for you or not for you, this thing. But once you've decided it's your lane, then the journey is the destination, you know?
For a future panel, I would love to do a future panel one day on failed ideas, like ideas that actually never make it to production and for whatever reasons why, and where it started and where it died before.
Well, right now, a lot of ideas are dying due to the pandemic, right?
That's true. Yeah.
I think I was in early, you know, like in research and early pre-production on a film that takes place in a high school in a basketball season. And it's like looking at this fall, we don't even know if schools are going to open or whether there'll be games, whether people will attend, you know, sporting events. So I feel like there's a lot of failed ideas right now.
Yeah.
But that's, yeah.
It looks, we do have some questions. I'd love to start taking some. We have several, but I'm going to combine a couple of them together. So we have one question about what advice do you have for an emerging filmmaker who wants to bring on an experienced producer onto an idea? I'm also going to combine that with, could you elaborate on your process of finding producers, editors, assembling a production team? Who best fits your vision, and how do you find and reach these people? So from both of these questions, thinking about not only casting or crafting, but also casting your crew. How do you find your collaborators? I'm wondering if you guys could speak to that.
I'm going to start charging you every time you say crafting, PJ, so just know that is trademarked. Okay, so I'm gonna, you know, we have these amazing organizations like ADOC and Brown Girls Dog Mafia and the D Word, and networking within the community is the best education that you can get. So, you know, every collaborator I found through community, and we have all these spaces where you get to see what people are like. And I think that anyone who's emerging, the best thing you can do is plug into community and get to know folk and become known. You know, I think a lot of people reach out. I get a bunch of these calls like, I want to do this thing and I need someone who's a producer, and you know, it's a lot. Like, to come on to somebody else's project and produce for them, you have to have a pretty high amount of confidence that, or they either have to be able to pay you, which is almost literally never the case. Not almost, it is literally never the case. Or you have to love it enough and also know that somebody is going to work with you, right? Not just resist you. So I think that getting a producer is probably the hardest piece of that question, an experienced producer, because they have their pick of projects. But I think the rest of the collaboration and the team, the best thing is just to insert yourself in community, pipe up in these spaces, and you know, build relationships.
How about anyone else building your team? Also, specifically, since all of you, I believe, were based somewhere filming elsewhere, how do you also maintain and manage that in terms of thinking about, you know, crew? Do you find someone local? Also, specifically, Sarita, do you also find someone in India, for instance?
Yeah, I think it's really important to have local crew, especially if you're not from that neighborhood, that state, that, you know, you don't live in a country full time. I think that's part of what makes your film authentic. It's who also is behind the camera. So yes, I put in a lot of energy to finding local crew, even if it's not in the entire team. I think it's, you know, you get on the, you go to, you know, you go to some of the networking events in that area, or you ask your filmmaker friends who knows somebody in the South, or, you know, who knows some good DP in Bombay. But I think that's pretty critical if you're not from the area and you're exclusively working somewhere to make a film, that you should definitely have some local crew. And I agree, you know, like it's really about that network and finding not what somebody's done on paper, but really being able to talk to them and seeing that you have a similar vision, you can communicate, you know, just sometimes it's bartering as well. I have to say, I've been in those situations where I'll help you out on your shoot, you help me out on mine, and then you build that relationship. So for emerging filmmakers, I would also say, like, that's one way to start building those collaborations that can last longer and go deeper.
Do any of you work with field directors or field producers?
Yeah, we did. We worked with a really fantastic all-star team, all women of color. I mean, our project is about representation in government, but as sort of folks who have done a lot of field building within our space, Grace and I were just very keen also to fix representation problems in our industry or to address them. So there was no way we could cover the stories, right? Partly because we were on a fixed timeline, an election-based timeline, so things happen concurrently in different places. So, but also because it was important for us that that the right people were telling the right stories. So, you know, we've both been around a long time, so we sort of were able to reach out to a real all-star team of friends, other women of color filmmakers who we knew were political. And then we worked really hard on sort of matching story with Filmmaker. And, you know, and then Grace and I also came in as well on top of, because there was just more that, you know, could be gotten to. But I mean, it was just, you know, I mean, 2018 is literally a blur for me. I think I was working like 17-hour days around the clock, because managing a crew of that size without having like a giant production company and a flat, you know, we didn't have any of that. We were literally making a series, like two of us on our computers with these folks out in the field, you know. So the way we did it on our project is that our field directors, you know, were on a lot of the shoots, particularly the earlier shoots, but everything got handed back to us after production. So all through the edit and the building of the story, we didn't, you know, that, so they really just were in the field. Again, I don't know what it would be like to work with some random person that I found, you know, by posting an ad or something, and these were known folk to us, and we were in constant dialogue because we had started the relationships and then they sort of picked them up in the field. But we were always like, well, make sure you ask about this, and this theme is emerging over here. Can you see if that's happening over here? So it was a very active, hands-on process with our field directors.
Yeah. So I want to echo what Marge just said. I found two amazing editors through ADOC. Brian Chen is ADOC member. Christina Matwani, she's a Brown Girl Stock Mafia member. So through these two groups, I was able to find two amazing editors to collaborate with. And being really conscious, you know, this is a film about my own community, right? So I was very conscious about people I work with. Do we share the same vision? And also POC and women as well. So, and so like, I think PJ, you had a question about like how to find crew in places that we're not based at. So yeah, I mean, definitely, I didn't have a field producer, but I had camera people in Ohio and North Carolina that I've met through a workshop at UC Berkeley investigative reporting program. They had a workshop, and it just so happened my cohort had filmmakers from North Carolina. So like building relationship, meeting people through festivals like Hot Docs and Doc NYC. I was able to find camera people in North Carolina. And like, so for example, there are things happening last minute that the character decided to go to a rally last minute. And I was in DC and I saw it on his Facebook. And, I really wanted to film that. So I asked Bridget, the amazing camera woman in North Carolina. And so she grabbed her camera and, she was able to get this amazing footage that ended up being the ending of the film. I can't imagine like how the film would end without that footage. And I also reached out to two of my former professors, American Factory directors, Julie and Steve. They're based in Ohio. I had never been to Ohio before. So they met with me very generously, recommended two camera people that worked on their film. So I was able to, have that crew on the ground as well.
We have a couple questions about, which is something I would love to discuss, maintaining your relationship with your protagonists. And Yi, you're touching upon this right now in terms of, obviously when you start following someone, you could follow almost everything in their life. Like, how do you start determining, especially if they're further away and they're not someone that you're going to see on a daily basis, how do you negotiate that checking in, determining when is the time to shoot, and then also opening it up to maybe no longer shooting? And how do you let someone know that you are no longer shooting, or perhaps that storyline is just not working out the way that you think it would, right? So I think what we're talking about is just the personal relationship that you form with whoever is going to be in front of your camera. How do you negotiate that in terms of knowing when to film, knowing when not to film, and maybe recognizing in the process, this is maybe not going to be filmed any longer? How do you tell them that? How do you break up?
I don't think I had to deal with a breakup, but I can certainly talk about when to shoot or when not to shoot. I think at the outset, give characters a sense of what I'm interested in and the story that, I intend to follow. So I think doing kind of, even though it's a verite film, but doing kind of a sit-down master interview at the beginning, like a super long interview, just ask all kinds of questions, getting to know them. I think that also gives them a sense of, through my questions, I think it gives them a sense of what I was looking for. And of course, the story, it evolves. But I think at the beginning, kind of let them know what my intention is and whether or not it aligns with what they want to do. And then in terms of check-ins, I try to check in maybe once every 2 weeks or once every month, but, very regularly, like what they're doing. And I also follow the news, Jim Rennie is running and what's going on politically. And, I would kind of reach out to him and say, like, are you doing door knocking? Are you doing filmmaking? What are you doing? So that sort of things.
Do all of you also do the master interview? I do that also. Like, I just tell me your story, and just get everything out so you kind of have a framework of where to go. I see a lot of nodding. Everyone does the kind of master interview. In a way, it's the best, right? It's like, it kind of is like, using this metaphor of dating. It's like the first date. You get to ask all the questions and get to know someone. But
is that what you do? Is that what you do on your first date? I know you're a married man now.
I know, I'm married. So
I don't think that's a good strategy, is it?
But how about for some of you, the idea of keeping in touch, the relationship that you form? Like, do you email them? Do you stalk them on Facebook? Like, how do you know when to start filming here?
Well, I was going to say to PJ about, I think there's also it's a lot of like setting expectations and being transparent from the beginning, right? So I think that, I mean, similarly, I haven't yet had to, you know, tell a potential protagonist that I'm no longer able to like include them in the film. But I imagine that if we set up that expectation in the beginning and kind of make it clear that like, this isn't to say that your work or your story isn't important. You know, it's about like the structure of the film, things like that, and kind of the larger goals of the project that y'all had agreed on from the beginning. I imagine that would make it a lot easier. I've also spoken to collaborators about, yeah, if it doesn't end up in the film, like, can I give that extra footage to them, or can I cut like a short scene, you know, because they dedicated a lot of like time and labor into filming with me. And I think that at the very least, as a gesture of gratitude, I could do something like that. And then I had one more thing I wanted to say, and it completely slipped my mind. It'll come back to me. Sorry, folks.
I wanted to add something, PJ. I mean, I think that one of the things that's, you know, exceptionally weird about what we do is that most of the time the person you approach has never been in a documentary before, right? Like it's a total unknown. And, you know, sometimes they don't know why this is actually a good idea for them, right? So they may have like a sort of whole set of resistance that's kind of just born of the unknownness of it. But you know that on the tail end of that, right? Or so like, I mean, I've done also a lot of commission work where I've been dealing with folks who've had really, you know, trauma in their lives. I did for years, I did work for the Federal Office on Child Abuse and Neglect, things that are difficult for people to talk about. But you know that the reason that you want them to tell this story is because there's all these other people out there, right, who are going to see this and feel like their lives make more sense. And so part of it, there is this kind of weird, there is a little bit of pushing, like you have to just keep leaning into them a little bit, because you know that at the end they're going to sit in the, well, now we can't sit in a dark theater together, but you know, one day again soon, they're going to sit and they're going to see their story, and they're going to see the people around them start to cry or laugh or be moved and feel seen by them. And you know that payoff is coming, but they just can't know that unless they've done it before, you know? And I think that one of the things I've often experienced is the people who are more guarded, you know, like when you're in the process of filming, the power dynamic is on their side a little bit, and that they can give you access or not give you access. And then there's this like regret afterwards when there's less of them in the film, right? And they're like, oh, you know, but so it's an exact reflection of how much access, how much people are willing to let you in. And so it's, you know, how do you handhold someone through that? You know, without not having their consent, obviously, but also, you know, like, you're going to have to trust me a little bit that you'll be very happy with what the thing is at the end, you know? So it's a lot of that negotiation that I find actually the trickiest part of filmmaking really is kind of that back and forth.
Yeah,
Sarita,
definitely.
did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I think initially, you know, with A Suitable Girl, we just tried to film a lot and show up at, you know, our protagonists' homes a lot. And there was definitely a point where they were like, have you not gotten enough yet? You know, it's like 3 years in, like, you want to come over again? And, you know, they get wary too. And so I do think throughout that process, you're continually having a conversation of, this is where we're at. This is why, you know, we want to shoot more. This is where it's going. And, you know, in the case of that film, it was like, well, when one of you get married, we'll stop filming, right? But, you know, I think we definitely had to have those conversations pretty frequently, and also, you know, show them clips at different points. I know people feel very differently about that. Like, I don't want to show anything till it's done, or it's okay to show stuff along the way. But, you know, there are points when I think we found that really important. Like, let's give them an idea of what this thing is going to look like, because now we are filming in year 3 and year 4, and they're just wondering what it's going to turn out to be. But I've definitely had that experience where, you're like, wait, I was only in the third of the film after you did all that, you know. So it was important to say there's more than one character in this. We are spending a lot of time with you, but there's 2 other people who are going to be in this film, and that transparency and that kind of acknowledging that, you know, it's multiple characters or whatever it is that back to that trust building, right?
We're getting towards the end, but I do want to ask one more question that's been a couple audience members have been asking about also, which is the question everyone always gets about funding, right? But but thinking about funding from different perspectives. One, how do you speak to funders when you're developing an idea and you don't quite know where it's going to go yet? Like, how do you pitch it to them? But 2, also, do you draw any distinction between development and production? And is it a matter of when you have enough funding to go into production, or does it just roll right in? So thinking about the, you know, the stuff we all love, right? Money, how that works in terms of filmmaking, but speaking to funders and also thinking about how funding affects your process. Like, when do you actually move into what you consider production, for instance?
So something I'm learning as a CAM fellow, and I'm working with Ramona Diaz, who's my mentor, who's wonderful and has done so many great films, you know, and being in the early development stage with my senior project is really the process of writing, and how critical that is in the early stages of even writing characters or archetypes of characters, you know, of this topic that you're thinking about. So even if you don't know the exact person that you're following and, you know, what that's going to look like, what do you imagine this thing to be, right? Like, what do you imagine that character to be, and what do you imagine the film to be, and writing that. And that actually helps in proposals, you know, like it can get you a little further, as opposed to being fixed on, well, I don't know exactly who I'm following yet, or you know, that person hasn't said yes. And I've just found that to be helpful at this stage of, you know, I have this idea of this film in my head about seniors, but these are the kind of people I think would make that film work, and writing that out.
Not to plug myself, and not that any of you need to look at my face for another 90 minutes, but right after this, I'm doing a grant writing workshop with Grace and Dana Merwin from IDA, you know, for CAM. I completely concur, Sarita. The writing is also, it forces you, right, to like get clear on it, because an idea that's swimming around your head while you're making a cup of tea and watering your plants and doing washing up is fine. But when you try to put it on paper and you know, like it doesn't, you can't finish the sentence. You gotta just keep working that process. But also, I mean, the first grants that we wrote that we were funded for included a whole bunch of characters that didn't end up being the ones that are in the actual film. You know, I don't think what a funder wants to know is that you know the story you're trying to tell, not necessarily this person's story, but why are you telling the story? What is the arc of the story? What is the experience? What is the value of the story? And you need to tell a story in writing first, right? And so I think folks can get really hung up on, well, I don't exactly know what will happen. It's you know, that's true for everyone's documentary. We don't know what's going to happen, but can you tell me a story that I want to see? And then, you know, you get funded, and then it changes, things change, you know, and I think funders are very comfortable with the idea that things change. So you have to be convincing, though. I think that's the power of grant writing.
I also feel like, I imagine a lot of us feel like you have to already have made a film in order to get funding for a film, or you already need to have money to get more money. You know what I mean? It becomes that kind of like circular logic in a way, which can be really frustrating when you're starting out and trying to apply for funding and things like that. But I have found that 100%, like if you can get your vision on paper and lay out like even archetypal characters, archetypal storyline, that helps. But also, and this is what I had meant to say earlier too about building your team, is that I think a lot of it comes down to your values and the perspective that you bring to the film. I've found that even before I was able to film anything and start reaching out to potential protagonists and things like that, that if I was able to refine why I was so committed to telling that kind of story, and where my like values, how my values were shaping that. And then in building the team, like finding people who were working on similar work or who had shared values in that way, I think that whether they're an editor, cinematographer, or producer has been so valuable for me starting out.
That's great. We have a couple minutes left, so I think we have to start wrapping up. But before we do, I want to give all of you an opportunity to tell everyone where they can follow you, find more of your work, or potentially watch your work if they didn't get a chance to do it or want to share it with someone. So Marj, why don't we begin with you?
I would love y'all to start following our project, because we're trying to create a I don't know, seismic movement of people of color engaging in this story. So the easiest way is to go to andshecouldbenext.com, where you can see the trailer without like actually playing through. And then also you can find the links to all our social. And then we're going to be in a couple more festivals, virtual festivals, but our broadcast is June 29th and June 30th over 2 nights on POV on PBS.
Great. How about you, E?
Yeah, first of all, I would love everyone to watch the film tonight as part of ChemFest Online. It starts at 5 p.m. Pacific time, and followed by a Q&A with me and 2 of the characters. And our website is firstvotefilm.com, same for all the social media, First Vote Film.
Great. Sarita?
You can see A Suitable Girl on Amazon, but please look out for the ADOC microdoc, the COVID-19 piece, which should be out next week. And it's a window into seniors in Queens and COVID. And so look out for that.
Great. And Ligaiya?
Not Your Model Minority has a Instagram account, and it's just at Not Your Model Minority with periods in between each word. Thank you.
Great. Well, I hope all of you can join me in thanking all of our panelists today for a really insightful and thoughtful discussion. I just want to end saying that I think these conversations are more important than ever right now. I think we can all agree upon that. And one of the things that I want to impress on everyone out there, what's also important is to support the work, right? So I am thanking organizations like CAM, that are making platforms like this possible for us to have these conversations, for us to share our work, for us to be able to connect and meet one another. So if you haven't already, you should join up for ADOC, for instance. You should join up for the newsletters. You should follow everyone here on their Instagram pages and watch their work, share their work, tell people to watch the work, because ultimately you are investing in your own community, right? And that's something that I think we need to really be mindful of at this moment. So, so with that said, I hope you also stick around. There's going to be some more programming coming up for the rest of the day, including Marj doing a panel on grant writing, which I'm going to attend because we all could use some tips on that. So thank you so much. And I will hand it over to Cam. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much, PJ. What an amazing panel, such rich discussion. Thank you, Sarita, Ligaiya, Marjan, and Yi. As PJ mentioned, please do join us for the next session on grant writing with Marjan and Grace talking about their project, and you get to find out more about the fundraising process. As well as Yi's film, which is broadcasting tonight at 5 p.m. Watch out for First Vote, and a conversation with her and 2 of her protagonists in that film. Thank you all for attending and for that great chatter in the chat, as well as all the great questions. Thank you all for joining us. Take care.